when Jasmine walked down the aisle. Her heart raced with joy and anticipation. But just moments before saying, "I do," her fiancé, Lucas, stopped the ceremony with a shocking confession that left her world in pieces. What was the truth he had been hiding all along? And would their love survive the betrayal? This is the story of how a single mother and a mysterious man in a wheelchair found each other against all odds, only to discover that love without trust can break even the strongest hearts. Stay with us for a tale of secrets, redemption, and the power of forgiveness that will leave you reaching for tissues. Jasmine adjusted the strap of her work bag as she stepped into the quiet sanctuary of her local library. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper, a welcome reprieve from her chaotic day. Between balancing her demanding job as a nurse and raising her 10-year-old son, Mason, moments like these felt like rare treasures. She wasn't here for herself, though. Mason had begged her to find the next book in his favorite science fiction series, and she couldn't bring herself to say no. Her eyes scanned the towering shelves as she wandered the aisles, her thoughts drifting. Mason had always been a curious and imaginative child, finding solace in stories about distant galaxies and heroic adventures. Jasmine smiled to herself, picturing his face lighting up when she brought the book home. But as she turned a corner, lost in thought, she nearly collided with a cart of books. "Careful there," came a calm, friendly voice. Jasmine looked up and froze. The man before her was seated in a wheelchair, his sandy blonde hair neatly combed, and his kind, green eyes studying her with quiet amusement. His sweater was slightly rumpled, giving him an approachable charm that immediately put her at ease. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she said quickly, stepping back. "I wasn't paying attention." "It's all right," he replied with a small smile. "You look like a woman on a mission. Can I help you find something?" Jasmine hesitated for a moment, but something about his demeanor made her want to trust him. "Actually, yes. I'm looking for galactic adventures. The Lost Galaxy. It's for my son." The man's face lit up. "Great choice. That one's popular. It should be in the sci-fi section. Top shelf. I can show you." "Thank you so much," she said, following as he maneuvered through the aisles with practiced ease. His confidence in navigating the space struck her, as did the ease with which he chatted. When they reached the shelf, Jasmine looked up at the book, perched just out of her reach. She frowned. Figures. Always the top shelf. Without missing a beat, the man wheeled over to grab a step stool. "Here you go," he said with a grin. "I'd get it for you, but gravity isn't on my side." Jasmine chuckled, climbing the stool and retrieving the book. "Got it." She turned to him with a grateful smile. "Thanks for the assist." "Anytime. I'm Lucas, by the way," he said, extending a hand. "Jasmine," she replied, shaking it. His grip was firm but unassuming, and she couldn't help but notice how attentive he seemed, as if he was genuinely interested in her. "Are you into sci-fi too? Or is this just for your son?" Lucas asked, curiosity lacing his tone. "Definitely just for him," Jasmine admitted with a laugh. "I'm more of a memoir and historical fiction kind of person." Lucas nodded thoughtfully. "Fair enough. But, every now and then, a good sci-fi can help you escape reality for a while. Life's heavy enough as it is." His words hung in the air, striking a chord Jasmine hadn't expected. Before she could respond, Lucas gestured to a nearby table. "If you've got a minute, I'd love to hear about your favorite stories. I'm always looking for recommendations." Jasmine glanced at the clock on the wall. She had a little time before Mason would need her, and Lucas' inviting smile made it hard to say no. "Okay," she said, sitting across from him. "But don't blame me if you end up with a reading list a mile long." For the next hour, they talked, exchanging thoughts on books, life, and even sharing laughs over Lucas' dry wit. Jasmine found herself relaxing in his presence, something she hadn't done in a long time. By the time her phone buzzed with a reminder, signaling it was time to go, She realized how much she'd enjoyed their conversation. "Thanks for the company," Jasmine said, standing and slipping the book into her bag. "Anytime," Lucas replied warmly. "And if your son likes that book, come back. I've got a few more recommendations." As Jasmine walked out of the library, she couldn't shake the feeling that something about Lucas was different. He listened intently, spoke thoughtfully, and seemed to see her in a way few people did. She hadn't felt this kind of connection in years. For the first time in what felt like forever, she caught herself smiling for no reason at all. What she didn't see was Lucas watching her leave, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He felt it too, something extraordinary. But with the weight of his secret, he couldn't help but wonder if he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Before we dive deeper into this incredible journey, let me ask you, where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you believe in the power of unexpected connections, hit that like button. This story is just getting started, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Jasmine couldn't remember the last time she had felt this way, light, hopeful, even a little giddy. Her conversations with Lucas became a regular highlight of her week. She'd stop by the library whenever she had a spare moment, and each time, she found herself drawn deeper into his world. Lucas had a way of making the ordinary feel extraordinary, whether they were discussing books, sharing jokes, or simply sitting in companionable silence. But the connection wasn't just between them. Lucas had quickly bonded with Mason too. One Saturday afternoon, Lucas had invited them both to the park for a chess game. Jasmine watched from a nearby bench as Mason leaned over the board, his brow furrowed in concentration, while Lucas gently coached him through the game. Seeing her son laugh with someone other than herself tugged at her heartstrings. Mason had been through so much since his father left, and Lucas' presence seemed to fill a void neither of them had fully acknowledged before. That evening, as Mason fell asleep clutching the sci-fi book Lucas had recommended, Jasmine found herself replaying their time at the park. Lucas wasn't just kind, he was consistent, steady, and deeply thoughtful. Yet, even as her feelings grew, there were moments that gave her pause, small things that didn't quite add up. The first time she noticed was during a quiet dinner at Lucas' apartment. It was a modest place, filled with books, simple furniture, and framed photographs. While Lucas cooked, Jasmine had wandered to the bookshelf and spotted a sleek leather-bound volume titled The Art of Negotiation. She pulled it out, flipping through the pages, and noticed meticulous handwritten notes in the margins. They weren't casual comments but detailed analyses that revealed an impressive depth of knowledge about corporate strategy. "Interesting book," she remarked when Lucas walked in, carrying 2 plates of pasta. "Oh, just something I read for fun," he replied nonchalantly, setting the plates on the table. "For fun?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "These notes look like they belong to a business professor." Lucas chuckled but didn't elaborate. "What can I say? I have an odd taste in reading material." Jasmine let it slide, but the moment stuck with her. The man she was getting to know so well had layers she couldn't quite unravel. Still, she reasoned, wasn't that part of the excitement? Everyone had their mysteries. As their relationship deepened, so did the scrutiny from those around them. Her mother, Evelyn, was the first to voice her concerns. "I'm just saying, Jasmine," Evelyn began one evening over coffee. "A man in his position, it's a lot to take on. Are you sure this is what you want?" "What do you mean, his position?" Jasmine countered, her irritation bubbling to the surface. "You know what I mean," Evelyn replied, her tone soft but firm. "He's in a wheelchair. That's not easy. For you or for Mason." Jasmine clenched her jaw, fighting the urge to snap. "Lucas is more than capable. He's kind, he's thoughtful, and he's wonderful with Mason. Isn't that what matters?" "I just want you to be realistic," Evelyn said, reaching for her daughter's hand. "Love is beautiful, but life can be hard." Jasmine pulled her hand away. "Lucas makes me happy. Mom, why can't you just be happy for me?" Evelyn sighed. clearly sensing that pushing further would only drive a wedge between them. "I just hope you know what you're doing," she said softly, but her words lingered long after their conversation ended. Strangers, too, seemed to have opinions about her and Lucas. On more than one occasion, Jasmine caught curious stares as they walked together in the park or sat at a cafe. Once, a couple at a nearby table whispered loud enough for her to hear, "What's a woman like her doing with him?" The comment stung, but Jasmine tried to brush it off. Lucas, for his part, always seemed unfazed, his easygoing demeanor never faltering. Yet she couldn't help but wonder if he noticed too, and if it hurt him as much as it hurt her. Despite these doubts and outside pressures, Jasmine's love for Lucas only grew, but so did her questions. Small inconsistencies began to pile up, forming a puzzle she couldn't ignore. There was the watch she glimpsed on his dresser, sleek, elegant, and far too expensive for someone who worked at a library. Then there were the occasional phone calls he'd quickly decline, his expression tight as he muttered, "Just an old friend." One rainy afternoon, while sharing lattes at a coffee shop, Jasmine's curiosity got the better of her. When Lucas' phone buzzed on the table, she caught a glimpse of the caller ID, Winston Holdings. "Who's Winston Holdings?" she asked casually as he declined the call. Lucas hesitated, his easy smile faltering for just a second before he shrugged. "Oh, it's nothing. Just some family business." "Family business?" Jasmine pressed, trying to keep her tone light. "Yeah," he said quickly, brushing it off. "It's not important." Jasmine nodded, but her unease grew. Lucas was hiding something, and while she wanted to believe it wasn't serious, the doubts began to creep in. What was he so afraid of sharing? Things came to a head one evening when Jasmine invited Lucas to a family dinner. She'd hoped it would help ease her family's concerns, but the night quickly turned tense. Her uncle, Charles, wasted no time getting straight to the point. "So, Lucas," Charles said over dessert, his tone polite but pointed, "what exactly do you do for a living?" "I'm a librarian," Lucas replied evenly, his expression calm. "A librarian," Charles repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Does that pay enough to support a family?" "Uncle Charles," Jasmine snapped, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "That's none of your business." "I'm just saying," Charles continued with a shrug. "Jasmine's worked hard to build a good life for herself and Mason. She deserves someone who can keep up." The tension in the room was palpable. Lucas remained composed, but Jasmine could see the flicker of discomfort in his eyes. On the drive home, she apologized profusely. "I'm so sorry about my uncle," she said, her voice filled with frustration. "He has no right to judge you." "It's okay," Lucas replied softly. "I'm used to it." "You shouldn't have to be," Jasmine said firmly. "You're incredible, and anyone who can't see that is blind." Lucas smiled at her words, but deep down, he knew the truth. The secret he'd been hiding was becoming harder to bear, and with every passing day, he feared the moment it would come to light. For Jasmine, the doubts lingered, gnawing at the edges of her happiness. She loved Lucas deeply, but the unanswered questions felt like cracks in the foundation of their relationship. Late at night, as she stared at the ceiling in her darkened bedroom, she couldn't help but wonder, what was Lucas hiding, and why couldn't he trust her enough to share it? The answers would come soon enough, but not in the way either of them expected. The wedding day arrived bathed in soft morning sunlight, the kind that promised hope and new beginnings. Jasmine sat in her small dressing room at the venue, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her lace-trimmed gown hugged her shoulders perfectly, and her makeup highlighted the glow of a bride ready to step into a new chapter. Yet, beneath her composed exterior, a storm of emotions brewed. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but something about the day felt off, not in the details of the ceremony or the way the flowers were perfectly arranged, but in the pit of her stomach. It was a nervousness she couldn't shake. Jasmine chalked it up to pre-wedding jitters. brushing aside the gnawing sense that the cracks in her relationship with Lucas, though hidden, hadn't entirely healed. When the music began to play, a gentle melody that filled the air with emotion, Jasmine took her father's arm and stepped into the aisle. The room was silent except for the soft notes of the piano. Guests rose to their feet, their smiles warm as they watched her walk toward the man waiting for her at the altar. Lucas stood tall, his sharp navy suit impeccably tailored, his expression a mix of adoration and nervousness. As their eyes met, Jasmine felt a fleeting moment of certainty. He was her partner, the man who had been there for her and Mason, who had made her feel seen in ways no one else ever had. For a moment, the doubts receded, but as she drew closer, something in Lucas' gaze shifted. His smile wavered, and his hands trembled slightly at his sides. When Jasmine finally reached him, the priest began the ceremony. His voice was steady and calm, guiding them through the formalities. Jasmine's heart beat faster with each passing moment, her emotions a whirlwind of excitement, love, and unease. Then, just as the priest prepared to ask the all-important question, Lucas took a small step back and raised his hand. "I'm sorry," Lucas said, his voice cracking slightly. "I can't let us go through with this until I tell you the truth." A hush fell over the room. Jasmine's brow furrowed in confusion, her bouquet trembling in her hands. "Lucas, what are you talking about?" she asked softly, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. He turned to face the crowd, his green eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "I owe all of you, especially Jasmine, the truth, and I should have told her long before today." The guests exchanged confused glances, and Jasmine's mother leaned forward, her expression a mix of concern and curiosity. Jasmine's heart sank. She had always suspected Lucas was hiding something, but she never imagined it would unravel like this, in front of everyone they cared about. Lucas turned back to her, his voice shaking. "Jasmine, I'm not who you think I am. The man you've come to know, the life I've shown you. It's not the whole story. I've been hiding something from you. Something important." Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. "What are you saying?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm not disabled," Lucas confessed, his words dropping like a stone into the stillness of the room. Gasps rippled through the crowd, but Jasmine barely heard them. Her mind raced, struggling to process what he'd just said. The wheelchair, it was all a lie. Her grip on the bouquet faltered, and her knees felt weak. "Why?" she demanded, her voice rising in disbelief. "Why would you do that?" "Because I needed to know," Lucas said, his tone desperate. "I needed to know if someone could love me for who I am, not for my money, not for my family's name. I was afraid that if I showed you the truth, if I showed you the life I came from, you wouldn't see me, just everything that comes with it." Jasmine stared at him, her eyes wide and brimming with tears. "Your money? Your family's name? What are you talking about?" Lucas took a shaky breath, glancing at the stunned faces of their guests before looking back at her. "I'm not just a librarian, Jasmine. My family is wealthy, very wealthy. Winston Holdings. The name you've seen on my phone. It's my family's company. I've spent my life running from it, trying to prove that I'm more than what I was born into." The weight of his words settled over Jasmine like a suffocating blanket. She felt exposed, humiliated, and betrayed all at once. Everything she thought she knew about Lucas, the man she had trusted with her heart and her son, now felt like a carefully constructed lie. "How could you do this to me?" Jasmine's voice cracked, her tears spilling over. "To Mason? You let us believe—" She couldn't finish the sentence, the enormity of it choking her. "Because I love you," Lucas said, his voice breaking. "I love you, Jasmine, and I didn't know how to tell you without losing you." Jasmine took a step back, shaking her head. "You already lost me the moment you lied. You made me believe in you, in us, and now I don't even know who you are." The silence in the room was deafening. Lucas reached for her hand, but she pulled away, her heart shattering with every step. Without another word, Jasmine turned and walked down the aisle, her veil trailing behind her like a ghost of the future they had planned together. Lucas watched her go, his chest tight with regret and despair. He had always feared this moment, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality of it. The whispers of the guests grew louder as the door closed behind Jasmine, leaving him standing alone at the altar, surrounded by the weight of his choices. When he finally looked up, he caught the gaze of Evelyn, Jasmine's mother, who shook her head with a mixture of disappointment and anger before following her daughter out. Lucas turned to the priest, who stood awkwardly with the open book in his hands, unsure of what to do next. "I'm sorry," Lucas murmured, though he wasn't sure who he was apologizing to anymore. As the guests slowly began to leave, Lucas stood in the empty church, his heart heavy with the knowledge that he might have just lost the best thing that had ever happened to him. He had thought that love could overcome anything, but now he realized that love, without trust, could crumble under the weight of its own secrets. And in that moment, surrounded by silence and regret, Lucas finally understood the cost of his choices. But it was a lesson that might have come too late. The days after the wedding that never was were a blur of heartbreak and silence. Jasmine sat in her apartment, staring at the untouched wedding dress hanging in the corner of her room. The once beautiful lace now felt like a cruel reminder of everything she had lost. Mason, her ever-curious son, picked up on her sadness but didn't ask questions. He simply brought her cups of tea and sat beside her while she stared out the window, lost in thought. The betrayal burned deep. It wasn't just the lie itself. It was the trust that Lucas had shattered. She had opened her heart to him, shared her life, let him into her world, and in return, he had built their entire relationship on a foundation of deception. She replayed his words in her head over and over. "I needed to know if someone could love me for me. It didn't make sense. Wasn't love supposed to be built on honesty?" Her phone buzzed incessantly in the days that followed. Friends and family checked in with messages of concern. But Jasmine didn't have the energy to reply. Lucas, too, reached out, calls, texts, and eventually a letter that arrived in her mailbox, neatly handwritten on thick stationery. It sat unopened on her kitchen counter for days. A silent question she wasn't ready to answer. Evelyn, her mother, finally came over one evening, unannounced. She let herself in with the spare key Jasmine had given her years ago and found her daughter sitting on the couch, Mason asleep against her shoulder. Evelyn gently nudged Mason awake, sending him to bed with a kiss on the forehead before sitting beside Jasmine. "You can't keep hiding from the world," Evelyn said softly, brushing Jasmine's hair back from her face. "I'm not hiding," Jasmine replied, though even she didn't believe her own words. "You're hurting," Evelyn corrected, "and you're allowed to hurt, but you're not allowed to let this break you." Jasmine stared at the floor, her voice trembling as she spoke. "He lied to me, Mom, about everything. How do I forgive something like that?" Evelyn sighed, leaning back into the couch. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, Jasmine. It means deciding if the love you had is worth fighting for, despite the pain." "And what if it's not?" Jasmine asked, tears welling in her eyes. "Then you let go," Evelyn said simply. "But only you can make that choice." The next day, Jasmine finally opened Lucas' letter. His handwriting was messy, his words raw and unguarded. He explained everything: his privileged upbringing, his strained relationship with his family, and his desperate attempt to escape the expectations and superficiality of his world. He admitted to the guilt and fear that had driven him to lie, and he begged for her forgiveness, promising to do whatever it took to make things right. As she read, Jasmine felt the first crack in the wall she had built around her heart. His words didn't erase the hurt, but they made her see the man she had fallen in love with, the man who, despite his flaws, had shown her kindness, patience, and genuine care. Still, she wasn't ready to face him. Not yet. Meanwhile, Lucas was struggling in his own way. His apartment felt emptier than ever without Jasmine's laughter or Mason's curious questions filling the space. He threw himself into work. But even the comfort of the library couldn't quiet the ache in his chest. He replayed their last conversation over and over, wishing he had been braver, wishing he had trusted Jasmine enough to tell her the truth from the beginning. One afternoon, unable to bear the silence any longer, Lucas decided to take action. He sold off a portion of his inheritance and used the money to fund local programs for single parents and children, including a generous donation to the library's youth literacy program. It was a small gesture, but it felt like the first step toward becoming the man he wanted to be, the man Jasmine had believed him to be. Weeks passed before Jasmine and Lucas saw each other again. It was a chance encounter, one neither of them could have predicted. Jasmine had taken Mason to the park on a crisp autumn afternoon, hoping the fresh air would lift her spirits. As Mason raced ahead to the playground, Jasmine spotted a familiar figure near the community garden. Lucas stood surrounded by a group of children, holding a book and reading aloud with his usual calm, steady voice. His wheelchair was nowhere in sight, and for the first time, Jasmine saw him as he truly was, no pretense, no facade. Just Lucas. She hesitated, unsure whether to approach him or walk away. But as she watched him kneel to meet a child's gaze and patiently answer their question, something inside her shifted. This was the man who had made Mason laugh, who had encouraged her to dream, who had reminded her what it felt like to be truly seen. Despite everything, she still cared for him. Lucas looked up then, his eyes locking with hers. His expression was a mix of surprise and hope, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Finally, Jasmine took a deep breath and walked toward him. "Hi," she said softly when she reached him. "Hi," Lucas replied, his voice equally quiet. He glanced at the children around him. "I'm just volunteering. Thought it might be a good way to, give back." Jasmine nodded, her heart pounding. "It suits you." They stood in awkward silence for a moment before Lucas spoke again. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again. I didn't think I'd want to," Jasmine admitted. "But here I am. I'm glad," Lucas said, his voice thick with emotion. "I know I have no right to ask, but can we talk?" Jasmine hesitated, then nodded. "Not here. Let's walk." They strolled through the park, the leaves crunching beneath their feet as they navigated the fragile space between them. Lucas spoke first, apologizing once more and explaining his actions with a candor that made Jasmine's chest tighten. He didn't make excuses. He simply laid bare his fears and insecurities, acknowledging the pain he had caused. When he finished, Jasmine stopped walking and turned to face him. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Lucas," she said, her voice steady but soft. "But I do know that I still care about you, and that scares me." Lucas reached for her hand but stopped himself, letting it fall to his side instead. "I'll wait," he said quietly. "For as long as it takes, I'll wait." Jasmine looked at him, her emotions warring within her. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, their story wasn't over yet. The weeks following Jasmine and Lucas' emotional conversation in the park were filled with cautious steps toward rebuilding what had been broken. Jasmine wasn't ready to dive back into a relationship, but she allowed Lucas into her life again. Slowly, on her terms. Their interactions were tentative at first, laced with moments of vulnerability and hesitation. But as time passed, the walls between them began to crumble. Lucas took every opportunity to show her that he had changed, not through grand gestures, but through quiet, consistent actions. He kept his promises, opened up about his past, and never pressured her for forgiveness. Jasmine, in turn, found herself letting go of the bitterness she had clung to. It wasn't easy, but each conversation, each shared moment, reminded her of the man she had fallen in love with. Not perfect, but real. One evening, Lucas invited her and Mason to a small gathering at the library. It was a celebration of the new children's literacy program he had funded. The space was alive with laughter and excitement as children explored the newly stocked shelves, their eyes lighting up with wonder. Jasmine watched as Lucas knelt beside a little girl, helping her choose a book. His patience and kindness on full display. Mason tugged at her sleeve, his voice filled with excitement. "Mom, did you see the section with all the sci-fi books?" Lucas said, "I can borrow as many as I want." Jasmine smiled, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and warmth. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Why don't you go pick one out?" As Mason darted off, Jasmine felt Lucas' presence beside her. She turned to find him looking at her with an expression that was both hopeful and vulnerable. "Thank you for coming," he said softly. "I wouldn't have missed it," she replied. "What you've done here, it's incredible. It's just a start," Lucas said, his gaze steady. "I want to do more, to be more for them, for you." And Mason, Jasmine's breath caught. The sincerity in his voice was undeniable, and for the first time, she let herself believe that they could have a future again. But she wasn't ready to say it. Not yet. Months passed, and their bond grew stronger. Lucas continued to integrate himself into Jasmine and Mason's lives, not as a replacement for what they had lost, but as someone who truly cared. They shared quiet dinners, took trips to the park, and even spent evenings at the library, where Mason proudly showed off his growing collection of books. Each moment was a small step toward healing, a piece of the trust that had been shattered slowly being rebuilt. One chilly autumn afternoon, Lucas suggested they take a walk through the park. The trees were ablaze with color, their leaves crunching underfoot as they strolled along the path. Mason ran ahead, his laughter echoing through the crisp air. Jasmine and Lucas walked side by side, their hands occasionally brushing but never quite meeting. As they reached a familiar bench near the community garden, Lucas stopped. He turned to Jasmine, his green eyes searching hers. "There's something I need to say," he began, his voice steady but nervous. Jasmine raised an eyebrow, her heart pounding. "What is it?" "I love you, Jasmine," Lucas said, his words filled with quiet conviction. "I've loved you since the day you almost knocked over that book cart. I know I messed up, and I'll never stop regretting the pain I caused you, but you've given me a second chance, and I don't want to waste it." Jasmine's lips parted, but no words came. Her chest tightened as a flood of emotions washed over her: love, fear, hope. Lucas took a deep breath and reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a small, simple box. He opened it to reveal a delicate gold band, understated but elegant. This time, no secrets, no lies, just us. "Jasmine, will you marry me?" Tears filled her eyes as she looked at him, her heart breaking open in the best possible way. She thought of everything they had been through, the lies, the heartbreak, the slow, steady process of finding their way back to each other. And in that moment, she knew. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling but sure. "Yes, Lucas." The relief and joy on his face were unmistakable. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and for the first time in a long time, Jasmine felt whole. Mason ran back just in time to see Lucas pull Jasmine into a warm embrace. "Are we celebrating something?" Mason asked, grinning up at them. Jasmine crouched to his level, her hand resting on his shoulder. "Lucas asked me to marry him, and I said yes." Mason's eyes lit up, and he threw his arms around both of them. "Does this mean I get more sci-fi books?" They all laughed, the sound ringing through the park like a promise of better days to come. Their second wedding was nothing like the first. It was small, intimate, held in the library courtyard under a canopy of string lights and autumn leaves. Evelyn gave a heartfelt toast about the strength of forgiveness and the beauty of second chances, and Mason proudly stood as Lucas' best man. As Jasmine and Lucas shared their first dance, the world around them seemed to fade away. Jasmine rested her head on his shoulder, her heart full of peace and gratitude. Their love wasn't perfect, but it was honest, resilient, and real, and that was enough. When the evening ended and the last guests had left, They stood together under the stars, their hands intertwined. Lucas leaned down, his voice soft but steady. "Thank you for believing in me, even when I didn't deserve it." Jasmine smiled, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Thank you for proving that love is worth the risk." Together, they turned toward the future, their hearts open and ready for whatever came next. Jasmine and Lucas' story wasn't a fairy tale. It was messy, imperfect, and filled with moments of doubt and pain. But it was real. Through heartbreak and healing, they learned that love isn't about perfection. It's about choosing each other every day, even when the road gets hard. Their journey wasn't defined by Lucas' wealth or Jasmine's struggles, but by the strength they found in vulnerability, honesty, and forgiveness. As they built their life together, they carried the lessons of their past with them. Jasmine learned to trust again, not blindly, but with the assurance that Lucas had earned her faith. Lucas, in turn, let go of the fear that had kept him hiding for so long. Together, they created a home filled with laughter, love, and the quiet joy of knowing they had overcome the odds. Their love story reminds us that second chances can lead to something even more beautiful than we ever imagined. It's proof that forgiveness doesn't erase the past, but it can build a stronger future. For Jasmine and Lucas, the real happy ending wasn't in the perfect wedding or the grand gestures. It was in the everyday moments, the shared smiles, and the unwavering commitment to each other. And that was more than enough.